This is indeed a tragic event. It's a somewhat unusual event in that this portion of southern Turkey, although it does get earthquakes, has not seen an earthquake of this size in quite some time. That said, it's a very seismically active area. It's just that the timescales over which Earth generates earthquakes and the timescales where we experience them are somewhat different. So we know that over hundreds of years, there have been many large earthquakes in this area. It simply this one has not happened in quite a long time. And of course, over that time period, populations grow and the impact becomes much more severe. You brought up maybe one of the most important things is that this earthquake was very shallow, and which means it was close to the surface, and that enhances the ground shaking, causes it to be a more violent experience. Off the top of my head, I don't know if I can come up with an example. It's certainly uncommon. It's not unheard of. Again, this is an area that has many, many different earthquake faults. Sometimes motion on one fault will increase the stress on another and push it into failure. Whether that's what happened here, or whether this is a traditional aftershock, is harder to evaluate at this early stage. But I think the indications are that one fault pushed another in. And as you've said, this is something that we've seen a great deal across the North Anatolian Fault in northern Turkey, but the timescales are usually a little longer. We do know that large earthquakes cause aftershocks. They are usually a little bit smaller than we saw in this case, from 7.8 to 7.5. That would be a very large aftershock, but again, not an unheard of one. One that I can think of, although the events were smaller and in a more isolated area, took place in sort of Central and Southern California in the US about, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, where there was an earthquake on the range of 6.5. And then several days later, it had another one that was a little larger. That was a 7 and change. So we do see them. As you said, they are less common, but it's not something that, it's a devastating event, but maybe not a surprising event. So at the very least, we know that this portion of the fault has released some of the stress that accumulated. There will be a very long aftershock sequence. That is the case with any large and shallow earthquake. It is very difficult with earthquakes to anticipate what will happen next. They are very random events. They occur without warning. So our hope is that this area has released some of the stress, but it may have added stress to other portions. So we really cannot say what the future will hold. You're absolutely right. There was a great deal of motion on that fault. I've seen photos where you can see the ground has shifted by several meters. That is, again, an unfortunately normal part of the earthquake process. In between earthquakes, the ground is basically storing that motion to be released in seconds. And that storing motion, that slow accumulation, happens so slowly that we don't see it. In some respects, that motion is Earth relaxing into its regular position, but we've been used to it being in a different shape. We wish we could say what would happen next. That thus far is not something that seismologists are able to do. So we hope that there will be some quiet, but we cannot say for certain. This was a very large earthquake. This was a magnitude 7.8, is very large. It's probably comparable with the largest nuclear test ever run, not a bomb that hit anybody, but the largest bombs that we have tested. Obviously a very different event in that it stretches across a very long area. The larger the earthquake, typically the larger the fault, the larger the area that moves. And in this case, that really meant it stretched across 300 kilometers or more, which is why it impacted so many communities. Earthquakes come in, of course, a wide range of sizes, and the scale is an enormous, it's a logarithmic scale, which means the 7.8 was probably twice as large as the 7.5. We do see larger earthquakes in the world. Not commonly in areas such as this one. For earthquakes to take place under continents is a little of the earthquake of this size to take place shallow beneath the continent is somewhat unusual. It's sort of one of the largest ones that we have seen. The larger earthquakes tend to be at coastlines where tectonic plates dive beneath one another. So for example, the 2011 Japan earthquake in Tohoku, or the earthquake that hit Sumatra in 2004 were considerably larger, but a little more distant from the communities that they impacted. With respect to, we will learn a great deal from this earthquake. I think maybe the thing we see most clearly is the need to always improve our building codes, because the great tragedy has been the collapse of buildings. Older buildings are often not constructed to the levels that we know now. We always hope that we will all learn. But really the only other thing I will add is my deepest sympathies to the people of Turkey and the people of Syria who are impacted by this. Please know that the whole world is standing with you and experiencing your grief with you. So